planet is Arrakis.
That is a gift, not a gift.
I must not fear.
Fear is the mind killer.
This is part of the Weeding Way.
Our warriors couldn't free Arrakis from the Harkonnens.
The podcast must flow. And so must the spice, because you heard it up top. It's a very special episode as we go to a one-of-a-kind planet, Arrakis, also known as Dune, on Normies Like Us, with your hosts, Colin, Idaho.
This would be Mike Melange.
And this is Jacob Atreides, but you may call me Kuab Deeb.
Kuab Deeb. Wow.
I am the Kwisatz Haderach.
And many more
other such words.
Incredible proper nouns coming from, obviously, Frank Herbert's legendary sci-fi novel, Dune. If you're watching, Jacob has it in the background. And
That's right.
Maybe, we were in Middle Earth. We weren't on Arrakis. We were at Middle Earth. And, maybe it feels like it came and went. But this is still a big deal. Dune's back and, even some news we'll get into. But we're finally getting around to it.
You're so right. The fantasy that birthed all fantasy. Are we here with the sci-fi that birthed all sci-fi?
You know what?
You could argue.
Yeah, I think definitely we'll have more info on that.
Many people have called Dune the Lord of the Rings of sci-fi. So if you believe that, then yes.
Yeah, and I guess just quick background on the episode. We're going to be kind of talking about Dune and all of its iterations, let's say. We have a little bit on the book, the different attempts to make it into a movie, and then the two attempts that did happen, David Lynch, and then pronounce his name, Jacob, you're good with these things.
Denis Villeneuve.
That's right, that Dune name. Yeah, Denis Villeneuve. His version.
Fear is the mind killer.
Podcast
you have
killer.
To pronounce his name. Go forward.
Denis Villeneuve.
Yes, French Canadian.
Take my hand in the box. So we're going to kind of go over all that.
Jabbar.
Yeah, the legacy of Dune. And honestly,
that's right.
I had never seen anything Dune related. I never read the book until the Denis Villeneuve version.
Perfect.
I'll get it at some point. Anyway,
yeah,
so that was my introduction.
Wild, Mike.
Yeah.
I would have thought that this would have been a big one for you. This was one of those things where, my dad loved David Lynch as a young man. He's one of my fucking favorite filmmakers. We'll get to my opinions on the movie. But just going through as a kid, going at 10 years old to his DVD rack, what's Blue Velvet? Can we watch Blue Velvet? No. What's Mulholland Drive? Can we watch Mulholland Drive? No. What's Dune? Oh, Dune!
Yeah.
Runs off to the back of the room, pulls out that big tome of a book. Doom, we can watch. So it's something that's always been in my life.
Nice.
Wow.
And then Jacob, you've been kind of leading the charge. As a Kwisatz Haderach on this.
You wanted this.
Yeah, whole thing.
I've wanted to talk about Dune for a while now. I mean, even when they announced that Denis Villeneuve would be making Dune, I was super psyched. And when they, announced the cast and all that, I was like, oh man, this is going to be great. They're nailing the cast. So I was very excited for it to come out. And it was a big hit. It wasn't, Spider-Man big, but it was probably one of the 10 biggest movies this year. So in terms of box office, but the story behind, Dune was long considered to be unfilmable. And there was many, like we mentioned, failed projects and one that was completed, but also failed. So it's a fascinating story just of it trying to get made over the years as well. And so I've been wanting to talk about the whole franchise for a long time, and I'm very excited to talk about it.
Gotcha. And have you read the entire book before? Or I know you're going through it right now.
Yes, I read it when I was much younger, probably in my early teens, and didn't 100% understand everything just because it's a very, it's a very dense book. But I love the world, and I even read some of its sequels and other books. So basically, Dune was written by Frank Herbert, 1965. He also wrote 5 more books in the series over the years. And then when he died in 1986, his son took over with Kevin J. Williamson, I think his name is, who you might know from, he's wrote a lot of Star Wars extended universe novels and such like that. So they kind of took that over. And I've read some of those prequels. such as the Butlerian Jihad, in case you're curious, which is all about the AI uprising that happens 10,000s of years earlier. That's why there's no computers in Dune, because they're outlawed because of that. And that's why they have mentats, which are like human computers. So
right.
There's a little fun fact for you. Yeah. So I'm a bit of a Dune head.
Yeah, I know you've been pushing for this for a long time. And as you mentioned, it's a dense kind of thing, and not just the book, but kind of its history, its legacy. It needs to be analyzed. And I think it's time that we put our mentat heads together and fucking dive in to the desert planet Arrakis and start talking Dune on Normies Like Us.
We're back. We're talking Dune, not just the planet, but of course the series itself and the phenomenon that it's sort of spawned. What's up with Dune?
Yeah, buddy.
Well, just to give a brief history of the many attempts to make a movie out of Dune. So, like I mentioned, it was written in 1965. Basically, right after that, starting in the early 70s, people were wanting to make it into a movie. And the first failed project was by this guy named Alejandro Jodorowsky, who was kind of like this surrealist art filmmaker who his best known movie is The Holy Mountain, which is this like crazy psychedelic movie from the 70s, which was financed by John Lennon and Yoko Ono and all that.
Oh, wow.
So super crazy, super like surreal and drug influence.
Very
for
70s,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah. But he had this all-star team of like different designers and special effects people that he was gathering, including H.R. Giger,
Wow.
famous for Alien, obviously, as well as Dan O'Bannon, who co-wrote or wrote Alien, and was also a very legendary like special effects guy, and several others. So he had this whole all-star team that would all go on to do other things like Alien, Star Wars, all that stuff.
Highly influential in genre stuff. Right.
Got all those ideas, Mike. I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder where they got him.
And he's kind of a madman, Jodorowsky. So he had this idea. He made this whole pitch book with pictures of everything, how he wanted everything to look, costumes and all that. But it kind of fell apart because he decided he wanted to make a 14-hour long movie. And the studio is like, can you make like a 2-hour movie? He was like, no, it's got to be at least 10 plus hours. Like, I can't tell this story in less than 10 hours.
He was
like,
right.
Well,
yeah, because, if it was today, they'd been like, yeah, we'll give you 7 episodes or whatever.
On HBO Max.
Yeah.
You're more than welcome.
But it did fall apart. And he had all these ideas. Like, he wanted Salvador Dali to play the Emperor, the Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV. He wanted Orson Welles to play Baron Harkonnen. So it would have just been crazy. He wanted Mick Jagger to play Fade Rotha. So all these different... It would have been insane. But it never got made. And they actually made a documentary about how it never got made called Jodorowsky's Dune, which I didn't get to see. I was going to watch it this weekend, but I ran out of time. It's basically just this guy explaining this whole crazy idea that he had for a movie that never got made. But he kind of claims he takes a lot of credit for things that happen afterwards, like Alien. He's like, I knew who H.R. Giger was way before anyone else. And yeah, so it's interesting, but that never got made. By the way, the NFT thing that Joe mentioned at the top, if you heard his little intro, that's super interesting as well. So these NFT crypto bros banded together. They bought the original pitch book for Jodorowsky's Dune for like $2.6 million, which was 100 times the asking price because it was going for like $26,000. They bought it for $2.6 million, and they said their plan is to adapt it into an original animated series and sell it to a streaming device. So basically, they mistakenly believed that buying this book gave them the rights to the IP of Dune, which of course it does not. So
and
really crazy.
Oh no!
Internet NFT-esque fashion.
Yes,
you don't actually own anything by purchasing that. Congratulations.
Fascinating, and that just happened.
Jacob, if I paid you $2.6 million for that book next to you, I own Dune, right?
That's right. I own this copy of Dune,
that's it.
And I'm going to make it into a movie because I own the copyright.
Hey, when is a gift not a gift? Am I right?
That's right. So that's hilarious. They also think that they should they want to burn the book because then it'll only exist on the blockchain in the form of an NFT, and that would make it more valuable to them. So the whole thing is just insane.
We're gonna start burning every physical copy of Dune, and then just the NFT will exist. That's a dark timeline.
So really dark timeline that we live in. But hilarious little side story to the whole Jodorowsky's Dune thing.
Wow. Okay.
So anyway, after all that failed, for a while Ridley Scott actually wanted to make it, and this was before Blade Runner. He ended up making Blade Runner in the 80s instead.
I wonder where all these ideas he was having were coming from.
Right.
Just grabbing these sci-fi concepts out of the air.
Exactly. So Alien, obviously greatly inspired by the Jodorowsky artwork in the Geiger artwork. So very interesting stuff there. And of course, Villeneuve would go on to direct the sequel to Blade Runner. So a lot of connections there. But Ridley Scott, it fell through for him as well.
Think about it that way. That's a very good point. Nice. Good catch.
And it goes to this hot up-and-coming director, David Lynch, who is fresh off of The Elephant Man, his first kind of breakthrough.
Let me jump in here.
Yes, jump in.
I want to point out that to anyone who doesn't know this, I'm not even sure or familiar with what your guys' opinions are on the weirdest human being who's ever lived, David Lynch. Mike, are you a Lynch fan?
I don't have a ton of, let's say, shares of David Lynch in my viewing schedule. I really, is Fight Club him, or is that David Fincher?
No.
See,
David Fincher.
I get those two conflated, and I don't know that much about either. No, I never saw Twin Peaks.
There's Blue Velvet. Mulholland Drive is probably one of his most famous.
I've seen that, and
he's known for a lot of surreal imagery, weird plots that they kind of don't make sense. He's just kind of, some people think he's just kind of randomly having surreal stuff, but he doesn't explain a lot, so you have to find your own meaning. He's
a film school junkie. He's a guy that a lot of those people. Now, listeners, imagine your weirdest, strangest cousin got put in charge of Star Wars. Imagine Andy Warhol is plucked out and said, like, you take Lord of the Rings and you just do whatever you want with it. It's a disastrous decision, essentially, that came about
100%.
through deals and favors. He kind of signed a contract with this man, Dino De Laurentiis, a very famous Italian financier of films, who had the rights to Dune and owned David Lynch's life, essentially, and said, do this if you want to keep working.
Right, and he would go on to make Blue Velvet 2 years later, which was his passion project, also starring Colin McLaughlin. But
so
at this point, he had only made
to be allowed to do other shit.
At this point, he made Eraserheads,
a Hobbit moment.
So he had Eraserhead, his first movie, which was like a weird black and white art movie, a lot of weird imagery, and then he made Elephant Man, which is the biopic about the Elephant Man guy,
John Merrick.
And that's kind of was his mainstream breakthrough. Then he got a bunch of offers to do different things, including Return of the Jedi, which he turned down, and then he did Dune instead. So we could have had Return of the Jedi directed by David Lynch, which I couldn't even imagine what that would be.
There
like.
was that period, Jacob, where Cronenberg too, where Hollywood's belief of you use special effects, which really back then meant makeup. And that means you could do any sci-fi film in the world. And you just think, no, these guys are doing surrealist horror movies.
Yeah, and at this point, people still thought like they could make David Lynch a mainstream director. This would be his last kind of mainstream project.
I was going to say, and people still maybe think that they're going to be the ones who can do that, and they have never succeeded.
With the exception of like Twin Peaks, which was very popular when it was on, but it's still super weird. But so he made Dune. It had a $40 million budget. I think maybe the highest budget of all time at that point. And it would go on to make $30 million on a $40 million budget, which, Hollywood, you got to make back at least twice your budget is generally the rule because of marketing. So $30 million on a $40 million budget, not great.
But let's say the big constraint too, Jacob, you're doing it in one. You're doing the whole book in one goddamn movie.
Right, which that was the big... so after they shot it, basically Lynch and Dino De Laurentiis had a big falling out because De Laurentiis wanted a 2-hour cut, whereas David Lynch wanted to make it a 3-hour cut. And he's like, I'm already, like, the original working cut, I think, was 4 hours. And he's like, I'm already cutting out a bunch of stuff. 2 hours, it would be impossible to, like, even follow what's going on at that point because you're cutting out so many scenes. So eventually, he had a big falling out. He took his name off the edited for TV version. So that's an Alan Smithy film. So yeah, it was a disaster to say the least. But we saw, so basically there's a fan cut of this by this person named Spice Diver. They're an anonymous person online. Nobody knows who they are. They have made yeah, basically. But they've made a few cuts of this over the years, but it's a 3-hour cut using a lot of deleted scenes and even some lower quality scenes that never got the full treatment and stuff, and kind of mix that in and made it a 3-hour cut. And
it's following roughly like the David Lynch script, right? They're trying to make it as similar to his vision as we could create a facsimile.
Yeah, and it's actually very close to honestly, it's a very literal adaptation of the book. A lot is included in there from the book. And that's kind of the problem with the Lynch version in general. So the way the book is written, it kind of bounces around from character to character perspective wise, and you can hear the inner thoughts of like all these different characters. So you know what everyone's thinking all the time. So the way Lynch kind of literalized that in the movie is by having a bunch of narration exposition, right? And the Spice Diver cut actually takes out like
what was bad about the movie, and I was watching him and I thought, is Jacob the one? Is Jacob the chosen one of this podcast who will lead us to
interesting because that is like how the book is written. There's a lot of inner monologue.
Right.
But you can't just do that in a movie because it's super like it's telling, not showing, right? And the Spice Diver cut even took out like 50% of that. So just imagine 50% more of the cut from that we watched.
Wow.
Now, but we all did watch this one. Mike, is that why the movie does not work?
It's a death by 1,000 cuts. This film.
Yeah, it's like that's part of it.
That's part of it, but that's not all of it. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is, obviously we're going to be comparing this version to the Villeneuve version a lot. A lot of the same scenes, it's very like a lot of it is pulled straight out of the book. There are certain weird things that Lynch adds, of course, but this Spice Diver cut 3 hours long, and then when I found a link that was actually someone else took and used AI to like machine learning to upscale it to 4K. So we can provide that link too in the description probably, so anyone who wants to watch it. But so we watched that this weekend, and Mike, what are your thoughts about this movie?
Wow. A hard pitch straight to me. I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by it as an artifact of art that someone made. There's so many bizarre decisions, bizarre scenes. Like you said, like plot threads that just kind of appear and disappear. Like some things are just never explained. It's a mess, but it's especially kind of like a beautiful mess. I don't know. Like I can't look away from it. I'm transfixed even though I don't think it's great. It's fascinating. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, it's super interesting. There are certain things that I really like about it. The production design, the sets, the costumes are all like incredible, I think.
For that period. Yeah.
And keep in mind, so this is, Return of the Jedi 83, right? So this is the year 84. This is the year after Star Wars. Star Wars is the biggest thing in the world. Dino De Laurentiis wanted basically Star Wars for grown-ups. So that's what he wanted David Lynch to make.
To even interject with this, Dino De Laurentiis, this is a very important fact to point out, had the rights to a little thing called Flash Gordon that this guy named George Lucas was obsessed with.
Right.
All he ever thought about his whole fucking life was, I would love to make a movie starring Flash Gordon. He did not let him do that. He said, I will take my toy and make something else then. And he invented Star Wars. So the fact that we are playing catch-up to the biggest movie of all time, and that literally, Jacob, the coming in thought to making this movie was, God damn it, how do we get our own goddamn Star Wars? Well, let's just take another one of these classic sci-fi books and ba-boom, ba-boom.
Yeah.
And, it's that's a brutal way to make something.
It's
and especially when you have a young man who's just not good at making something like that.
Well, so you compare it to something like Return of the Jedi. obviously that's, a family-friendly movie. You got Ewoks, you got action adventure. This movie, you got a villain with weird blisters on his face, shouting like a maniac.
Patrick Stewart with a lute.
Sting.
He's just coming in.
You got Paul's, sister, unborn sister, who's born with the consciousness of an adult, Saint Elia of the Knife, which is from the books, and I'm very interested to see how Villeneuve does that.
Everybody at home, this is spoilers for Dune. Because
Dune
this
Part
movie
2
covers the whole book. So if you don't want to know what happens to Timothée Chalamet,
yes,
just plug your ears. But this
Which
covers all of it.
From a 1965 book, but if you are not familiar with it, you want to be surprised when Part 2 comes out.
Yeah.
But to your point, Jacob, it will have to be pretty close because it seems like, again, the Lynch version was very slavish to the book material. It seems like the Denis Villeneuve was as well. Even down to a lot of the aesthetic is almost exactly the same in the movies.
Yeah. There's a lot of similarity between the two. I want to mention while we were talking about, like you said, you can't just say, let's get another sci-fi book and go for it. We saw that with fantasy once Lord of the Rings, we'll just get more book and go for it. But the fact is, Star Wars itself was heavily informed by Dune, the book, anyway. So it's like
100%.
The Dune movie is chasing the Star Wars movie that wouldn't exist without the Dune book. I mean, they both have spice and desert planets. They're essentially both a hero's journey. Like Luke and Paul, they kind of have the same hero's journey. Really is like they're.
And that's why people say that Dune is the Lord of the Rings of sci-fi, in that inspired, Lord of the Rings changed the idea of what elves and dwarves and that kind of thing are in fantasy for like all time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dune did that with similar, sandworms. It's the first thing to like have sandworms. Now, how many things have like sandworms in them,
Do you know what the first sandworm you ever saw was, Colin, in your life? Or derivative of the Dune sandworm?
It was Return of the Jedi, because I had confessed to you guys, that I had a very primal fear of the Rancor previously. I was also very scared of the sandworms. I think I saw Return of the Jedi at a very young age, and it just kind of scared me across the board.
I mean, traditional Return of the Jedi, you don't even see its beak. It's just a big hole.
No,
but it's still scary,
edition.
I guess.
Yeah, it gets improved by George Lucas's later cuts.
I mean,
right?
Joe mentioned up top.
Do you remember, Mike? Was it Beetlejuice?
No, it wasn't. I've never seen Beetlejuice. How's that for a crazy
Beetlejuice
story?
But it's got some pretty good sandworms in it.
We made some good jokes off pod, and Joe mentioned it at his little intro that Tremors is a good sandworm movie. Perfect sandworm movie. But for me, I think Final Fantasy VII, weirdly, there's a moment when you're in the desert prison outside of the Golden Saucer. If you know, you know. And then if you try to leave, there's sandworms that'll fight you, and they're pretty tough for what level you are. So that I'm like, even Final Fantasy got some Dune in it. So there you go. Yeah.
That is crazy. And when Frank Herbert was writing the book, he was very inspired by ecology, also very similar to J.R.R. Tolkien. Like he was very interested in the deserts of America and the dunes, the shifting winds and all that. And he was also very interested. He had a hobby of like growing mushrooms, and he also experimented a lot with, psilocybin mushrooms. And so that's what the spice melange is based on.
Spice melange.
Oh, you think? Hey, let's say real quick right now. And you should probably clarify what it is, Jacob. But what would you guys do spice?
Oh, I mean, you have to,
I'm heavily nodding.
Are there negative?
That's Haderach.
What is it? Does it fuck you up if you do it?
It gives you visions of crazy shit. It looks like
it gives
for
you
Timothy.
visions. It's kind of a spiritual thing for the Fremen. It also is the reason that they can travel through space, because they can fold space. That's the Spacers Guild, which I think they'll get into more in the second part of Villeneuve's as well. So that's super interesting. That's that weird guy that you see at the beginning of the Lynch version that comes and talks to the Emperor.
That's the best.
Yeah, I love that guy.
Fucking embryo in the thing that's like, we are in control.
He has little vacuuming guys. For some reason, a couple of them are just constantly vacuuming his cage. Yeah.
It's insane. So many again, the Lynch version, so many production design decisions that are just bizarre,
but they're incredible at the same time. And I guess that's the thing, because we are kind of talking about a world from the book, and they were pretty accurate, but then those artistic flares of each creator are there. But kind of the idea of a planet, and now that you explain Herbert's mindset and messing with mushrooms, it's like, what if like when I did LSD, I could travel through space. And then all the space governments wanted my LSD.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
There was a planet.
That's
and then
Mike's
it's like,
book.
okay, there you go.
It's
like
the most
most popular
it's
drug is also the most popular fuel.
Yeah, so it's the
go.
single most it's the single most valuable thing in the world because of that.
Yep.
So yeah, he was very inspired by
Fascinating setup,
drugs.
I would say too. Just that idea.
Yeah.
There's a very, very important planet
The worms droppings, correct? That is what's going on there.
with the
I
spice.
think so.
there's
Yeah,
some
it's all
relation.
about
David
Frank
Lynch
Herbert's
didn't want to
very
explain it
interested
to me.
Yeah.
He just showed me things.
That's true.
Frank Herbert was very interested in mycology, the growing of mushrooms, and the worm. There are worms that like eat mushrooms in the wild. So that's what the sandworms are based on, just like a giant version of that. And then he was also very inspired by theology, both Christian and Muslim. There's like a mixture, and that's where you get these Muslim sounding words and all that stuff because he's very interested in language. Again, J.R.R. Tolkien. So a lot of similarities between them as like the thing from their genre, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like that detail, creating something like we said it's dense. It's 100 miles deep and 1,000 miles wide. That kind of thing. Like there's a lot that he considered to make the Fremen feel actualized, make the Atreides feel actualized, make the Harkonnen feel actualized. And I think David Lynch, we'll get to Denis Villeneuve, but like I think David Lynch really fails at giving me a sense as an audience that all of that thought into these cultures went into it. Because what I see on screen is like pretty one-dimensional for pretty much every faction.
Well, that's the thing.
I have a hard time with that in that movie.
I think it all comes down to the pace and the time. Like he doesn't have the time to kind of expand on these ideas, so it's just moving from plot point to plot point, showing them like as literally as possible, but just jumping around, especially in the last hour when it gets to the stuff that'll be in Dune Part 2, where it's just jumping. Yeah,
we watched a 3-hour cut of this movie, and basically everything until the last hour is just where Denis Villeneuve's version ends.
Right.
So I was like, there's only an hour left for the rest of the book, and I don't know what chapter. Yeah, and now we're just going to stretch it. So who knows?
That's why at one point they're like, "Oh, 2 years has passed, and Paul's been doing all this."
And now
shit.
there's a kid.
I am the leader.
Yeah, they literally hit you with
it.
It
Really
2 years
goes
later.
off the rails in that last third. But imagine that as a full movie, it's going to work so much better, and that's why.
In this case, I do. When you look at just how much is rushed between like preparing for the battle and training the troops and this and that, it's like, you could do a whole movie for this.
The worm riding is going to be so dope in the Villeneuve version, I bet.
Yeah. But I have a question, Jacob.
Kyle MacLachlan, hold on. When he gets up top and he does the thing and he's riding and it's the small little him and the huge back projection. Normies, you have to watch movies from these time periods for this stuff.
You know what? That just reminded me because as I was watching that exact scene and it just jogged something in having a spice vision, I was like, this reminds me so much of Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings because it's this insane creative energy and mixture of techniques.
Ralph Bakshi was on Melange when he made Return of the King.
So it's like a live action version of that energy manifest into a 3-hour movie.
And it has the same problem of trying to be too rushed, especially at the ending. And they don't even get to Return of the King, obviously.
But
so
there's just a ton of interesting shit in the frame.
Jacob, I would argue it's got the same issue of a maniac is in control of the material that he has no grasp on. That he is just like allowed to do whatever he wants, but is crumbling under the weight of that.
Yes, it's incredible.
So there's a lot of interesting stuff that'll be in Dune Part 2 that I'm very excited for.
I almost didn't want to finish it. Like the Lynch cut. I enjoyed the Denis Villeneuve one so much more. We'll get there. But it's like I kind of wanted to be surprised. But I know it's a book and the spoiler window is over. So it's like, I'll just see what David Lynch did and then go into the Dune 2.
Hopefully, by the time it comes out, you might have forgot a lot of ways. So you might be surprised.
It all depends on how much Longbottom Leaf remains in Saruman's storeroom.
Pretty much.
Yeah. But yeah, the Lynch version.
What's in your heart? What do you feel in your heart about the Lynch version as a Dune?
I'm glad it exists, and I'm glad I watched that Spice Diver cut. I mean, there's no denying, like the Villeneuve version is a way better movie. Like I don't think anyone can disagree with that unless you just want to be a contrarian. But if you look, I know certain people will love the aesthetic of the Lynch version, and I get it. There are some weird things, like everything with the Harkonnens is just insane in the Lynch version.
Someone made a supercut on YouTube. I was looking up quotes for the episode, and it was just called "Those Wacky Harkonnens," and it was just all the weird shit that they do in the movie is supercut because
they're amazing.
Yeah.
They're the character actors of the time. People you would not see starring them. The fact that we get like David Dastmalkin in one of those characters in the new one, that's about the closest casting wise you get. Otherwise, these are David Lynch maniac regulars, is what you have to understand too.
So the David Dastmalkian character in the Lynch version is played by Brad Dourif, who we love, Nima Wormtongue,
Chucky and Wormtongue himself, an absolute lunatic in a boil-ridden maniac performance.
Well, it ties back to my Sorma
if I can say. As a Lynch fan, I'm actually mad this movie exists. For the longest time, my dad would say, it's just unwatchable. And I would say, how can it be? And I have fallen for that line of thinking 500 times in my lifetime. You say the aesthetics and stuff. It is good and interesting that someone with that mindset got to play with that much money. There's a reason you never see it again, unfortunately. And there's just nothing here. There's just nothing here.
Well, it's a real turning point in his career because after this, he would only do small, weird movies. Yeah. But
I know there's one thing you like in this movie, Colin, and that's Sean Young, Blade Runner.
Yeah, that's right.
You're right. It's all tied together.
Sean Young and Blade Runner. I mean, again, the cast is just absolute maniacs, but she is so good as Chani.
For the 7 minutes that she's in the movie.
Good as Paul. She's in none of it. I think Zendaya is going to be in just as much, unfortunately.
Well, she's gonna be much. I think Zendaya will be in it in a bigger role in part 2. Similar to even how what the Villeneuve version I love about it is Lady Jessica is a much bigger role in the Villeneuve version, which in the book she is like the second most important character other than Paul. In the Lynch version, I feel like she was really underutilized. I like that about the Villeneuve version. Chani is, so spoiler alert, but it's in the Lynch version. Dr. Kynes' daughter is Chani. So Dr. Kynes, who's played by Max von Sydow in the Lynch version.
Star Wars also.
Gender swapped in the Villeneuve version, so she's a lady, but I still think they'll keep that familial connection.
Leader of the Fremen.
Yes.
Right. Interesting.
But there is some certain things that I really like about the Lynch version. I'm glad it exists. And
all right.
Yeah.
Here's one of the best things about it. Patrick Stewart.
Yes.
You like Patrick Stewart pre-TNG playing a lute. Going into battle with a dog, famously.
The card roll.
Yeah.
He's okay.
And he grows a bald man mullet. It's incredible.
Yes, he's got long hair while being bald.
Strangles in the back. He runs in with that pug. Let's go! Bang, bang, bang.
Yeah, it's an artifact,
playing...
just like Bakshi's film. It's like you need to just experience it, but you're not going to enjoy it. Maybe.
No.
Yeah, and Patrick Stewart at this time, he wasn't as well known as you later would become, but he was well known as sort of a Shakespearean actor.
Yeah.
This was just a few years before TNG.
He Shakespeare's the hell out of it too. He's trying.
Yes. So he doesn't have a lot of lines, but every line he has, he's acting the hell out of it. He plays Gurney Halleck, who's played by Josh Brolin in the new version. And he in the books he is like a troubadour, like a warrior troubadour. And so I like that he plays the balisette at one point. That's he's always quoting literature and like the Bible and shit.
They call it a battle
really...
bard in 5th edition. Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly.
Ooh, big casting. I got to ask you about Jacob. How about Jurgen Prochnow as the Duke Atreides, the king, who of course is Oscar Isaacs in the new film?
Yes, he's all right. I thought him, Kyle MacLachlan, they're all right. But I overall, pretty much 99% of the cast in the Villeneuve version, I prefer. I think the only one is Gurney Halleck, because of Patrick Stewart. I thought Josh Brolin was fine, but he's not Patrick Stewart.
Oh, the Baron too is obviously better in David Lynch's version.
Oh yeah.
Not more threatening, but more entertaining.
And of course, we have the character of Fade Rotha, which is Sting.
Yes.
He has not showed up in the Villeneuve version yet. He is going to be in part 2, and guess what? I already have a casting for him. Denis Villeneuve, if you're listening.
Oh, okay.
No, I have my preferred casting, which I will tell Denis. I'm assuming he's listening.
Yeah.
So the Sting role, obviously, he's the nephew of the Baron Harkonnen. him and the Beast Robin, who was played by Batista in the new version.
Blade Runner.
But Fade Wrather, we haven't seen him yet. I've got the perfect casting for him.
Who is it?
Robert Pattinson.
Robert Pattinson.
Again, contrasting against Timothy Chalamet as Paul Atreides. They'll have that knife fight at the end.
Reunion of the King.
Yeah, they were both in The King. They had a duel.
The Return of the King, I mean.
Return of the King.
Yeah.
He played the French prince.
He would get into it.
I would love that.
Crazy.
Oh, he would go for it, I think. I think that would be a perfect...
I could see him with Batista, too. Yeah, and Ed Sheeran. No, I think you're right, Jacob.
What do you think? So, Denis, if you're listening, Robert Pattinson, perfect casting.
He's already in the Warner Brothers family.
Okay. Yeah. I think he would fit with that whole cast.
Yeah, there's one. He's filming Batman two lots down, 2 sound stages down. But who knows? Because Jacob, based on the buzz of the internet right now, obviously your Spider-Man plan for Andrew Garfield seems to be getting a lot of groundswell. That was your original idea, so maybe this will come to fruition too.
I'd like to see Andrew Garfield play him.
Hire me.
Yeah, Andrew Garfield. Let him do it.
Andrew Garfield, another great choice.
Tom Hardy.
Whoever it is, they have to wear that Speedo that Sting wears when they have a knife fight.
Yes.
There's a lot of knife fights in Dune.
Yeah,
if we're staying with problematic things
the slow blade.
that I love, David Lynch, I'll also say Bret Easton Ellis, had a book, most famous for American Psycho, that author, had a book called Rules of Attraction when we were kids that literally has characters. A parent is a film executive, and he keeps pitching in the book, I want to put Sting in a movie. Sting's got to be in a movie. I got this huge sci-fi thing that's going to come out. That's before Dune. So that always kind of interested me.
Wow.
What a weird.
I feel like Sting is trying to make his David Bowie run here. Like he's like,
I think that's what the energy is, Mike. You're
for
totally
sure,
right.
for sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting casting choice. Like I said, the Jodorowsky one, he wanted Mick Jagger to play that role, so it's always got to be like a famous musician. But maybe we get like whoever the most famous rock star is now.
Jacob, I'll say if we already gender
Travis
swap Max von Sydow, how about Billie Eilish? Billie Eilish is this fucking maniac character. That would be crazy.
I would actually, I could see her in a Dune outfit fitting right in.
I can see her literally just wearing that thong holding a knife with crazy hair. Just going like, let's do it.
She'll have to say I'm the bad guy. Yeah.
Why not?
Perfect.
We got Batista coming back as the Beast Rabin, who will control Arrakis.
Squeeze it. He's gonna squeeze Arrakis.
And then they decapitate him in the Lynch version at the end there. That's pretty crazy. But these are all spoilers, I guess. But
let's jump in. Let's jump to the rest of Dune. Let's talk the new movie itself. Let's go to Arrakis. Let's snort some melange and finish talking Dune.
Melange.
We're back. We've got weird shaved heads, and we're putting them together to talk Dune as the Bene Gesserit. Is that right, Jacob?
That's right.
Nice.
That's right.
They have weird hairstyles in the Lynch version.
Yeah.
And I'm really hoping Rebecca Ferguson will carry that over.
Yes.
But we're talking now the Denis Villeneuve Dune. Big hit of the summer. Now, Jacob, you have wanted to talk about Dune for a while. You wanted to talk about it before the release. You wanted to do an episode during the release. We kept moving. We were doing our Lord of the Rings. Want to do an episode. In that time, we weren't positive there was going to be a Dune 2. But now doing this episode, we know they are going to continue and make it a sequel to this film that we watched as well.
That's right. Yeah, the studio didn't commit to a sequel until it came out. They wanted to see how it would do, which is never a good idea. But fortunately, it made enough money because obviously, so Denis Villeneuve, great director. His movies in the past haven't always been huge hits. Blade Runner 2049, they kind of bet a lot on that. Wasn't a huge hit, was kind of a bomb, even though people liked it. It just didn't get seen by a huge audience. Fortunately, Dune was a hit, and pretty much right after it came out, they're like, yeah, we'll make a sequel.
And what's great about the success of Dune is, it was day and date on HBO Max. So, obviously it's not going to make nearly as much money as Spider-Man did. It couldn't have. A lot of people did watch it at home, and I'm one of them, and I appreciate that they stuck to their guns for the whole year. But
Point out, Mike.
And
a lot of those,
I was very pleased. That's all.
Right, and looking back on that whole day and date HBO thing, most of those movies failed, with the exception of Dune and King Kong versus Godzilla.
Hell yeah.
Basically, only
Yes.
two
They're
that
equal
were
in quality, I think.
Now, Jacob,
Yes.
yeah, agreed, Mike. Now, the interesting thing is, Warner Brothers has not been interested in talking about or sharing any information of this worked. This one was a hit. This one was bad. They have not done any of that. Except, I agree with you with that, the two instances where they overperformed so much. I think the internal projections were Dune is going to be what it's going to be. We're very excited to keep working with Denny. We lost Christopher Nolan, so we'd like a couple of tours to stick around.
Right.
Let's see how this goes. And the minute people sort of started saying, is this a best picture contender? Is Hans Zimmer going to win best score for this thing?
Right.
And then the money started coming in. I really do think the attitude became, well, everybody knows that Dune is a masterpiece of cinema, and it's just always been that way. And you have to buy the 4K, and it's been a really interesting journey.
But obviously, the studio didn't have the same comments that New Line had for New Line for Lord of the Rings, where they gave Peter Jackson shoot the whole trilogy at once. They didn't do that for Villeneuve. They're like, let's see how it do. Yeah, but now they're like, okay, yeah, now we want to make as many Dune movies as we can. Sure.
Yeah. Two more.
Good news there. Honestly, the greatest thing about the Villeneuve version for me is just the casting. They nailed the characters, and I think they nailed the relationships between Paul and his mother, his mother and father, Lady Jessica and Duke Leto. They really nailed those relationships, and I think that's what makes it work so much better. Oscar Isaac is perfect. Rebecca Ferguson, amazing. I just love those relationships.
Jacob, do you remember the rollout of the casting? Because it would happen, you'd get a person a week, the excitement. Literally, you would see articles where people were like, has a cast ever been this big of just A-listers? Then all of a sudden, the Knives Out 2 cast started coming out, and it was like a rivalry of A-lister, A-lister, A-lister.
Who wants which artsy guy can get the most A-listers on his movie?
Right.
Yeah.
For me, it was like that, the Vince McMahon meme where he just gets more and more excited.
Gets more and more excited.
That was me, where it's like, Jason Momoa, Batista. I was like,
Zendaya,
Zendaya, Timothy Chalamet.
That was the final nail in the coffin.
This movie's going to be fucking epic. And obviously, Batista was in Blade Runner.
Mm-hmm.
So some of his usuals. But yeah, they really nailed the casting. I love the advisors, Duncan Idaho, Gurney Halleck, Thafir Hawat. They nailed all those roles. So good job.
It's insane that they're all still intertwined with Blade Runner and Star Wars.
Yeah.
Even, Oscar Isaac and all that. It's you can't escape it. Yeah.
And Rebecca Ferguson, who I think is really underrated. She was in the the last couple Mission Impossible movies. Lady Jessica is such an interesting character, and I feel like she really got underutilized in the Lynch version.
So let me ask Colin, what did you think of the Denis Villeneuve one? Because you claimed there might be no good version of Dune. What are your thoughts on this? Because we're going to gush, but I want you to get your piece in.
And it truly comes down to my just full-on thought is this is not a movie. It's a collection of great scenes, and then it ends with two people having the most boring knife fight you have ever seen in your life. And that's totally fine. I saw it at home. I would have loved to motherfucking IMAX this thing. I'm with Jacob. I get excited just even talking to you guys about it, just because even hearing you say the sci-fi words and talk about the cast, I am like, fuck, who doesn't like a movie with a cast that fucking good? So, but that's where I'm at with it.
I agree with what you're saying, the most boring knife fight ever. But then I have to ask myself, that's your climax. It's a one-on-one knife fight, right? But it's is that scene more boring than the giant battle that David Lynch did? Because that shit was so weird and disjointed, and I don't understand. What's the gun that you talk into? What is that? He didn't explain it.
Okay, so that's totally a Lynch invention. Okay. So in the book they have the weirding way, which is
they're not just out here, dragonborn, Fusro dying, what is that?
So they kind of are.
In the books, there's the weirding way, which is the Atreides special martial arts. But so David Lynch decided we're gonna have these things called weirding modules, which are guns that you use sound to shoot
like a microphone
things
under your neck. Yeah.
Yeah. It didn't make sense, and that was one of the weirdest changes.
So that's not from the book.
No.
Damn, I was really hoping we'd see Timothy Chalamet teach people word guns. Die.
But I'll be sympathetic to my weird boy for a second and say, you're reading this source material and it has things like the voice, it has the weirding way, it has walking without rhythm, it has all this fucking stuff where you're like, no audience is going to be able to understand this. We're all on drugs. It's the 80s.
That's right.
There's a lot of exposition, and even the Villeneuve version, it's like they have to explain so much. The still suits, how they work, how all this shit works.
Jacob, they do. The one genius thing I will fucking give Denis Villeneuve on the explanation front, to literally remove the voiceover and instead go, he just has a learning robot that he'll just like click on that goes like, this is what Arrakis is. This is this other thing. Of course that fucking makes 1,000 times more sense.
Yeah,
and that's
just
something
reading
the
his
Spice Diver
10 things to do in Arrakis tour book, like why wouldn't you?
Exactly. It just gets on Google.
It's natural.
I know computers are outlawed.
Yeah.
Yes. There's so much to explain, and that definitely helps. And even the Spice Diver cut of the Lynch version adds a bunch of that in to explain certain things.
But that ending is so rushed. It's just like there's no way.
Yeah,
it makes sense.
Like the ending. So compare. Okay, so in the Villeneuve version, when they go rescue the spice miners, right? That's a great scene.
Oh, incredible!
In the Lynch version, it's not as good, right?
It's okay.
So the action is way better in the Villeneuve version. So all the battles and stuff in the second part of the book is going to be so much better, I think, in the Villeneuve version because of the cinematography, the action.
Yeah. That dream battle that we saw, like it was in the trailer. It was like he had that vision, like just that was sick, and it was just like a tease.
Right.
I think of what.
So you say his knife fight with Jamis isn't maybe that great, but then there's a lot of knife fights in the books because then he also knife fights Sting. So
it will be mirrored later. Great.
I wish the shields looked like the David Lynch versions, though.
I do too, actually. Yes. Moving rectangle. I would love if Tron came out and threw a disc at me, Mike.
Yeah, let's do that.
That's the thing is, like, I think some of the effects from the Lynch version do hold up. Like the the worm effects are pretty good for that era for the Lynch version, but the shields are
bad,
amazingly bad.
Because like computer imaging is not a thing yet. Really, they're trying, but
but it's like Tron. Yeah,
I think that's what I love about the Villeneuve, though. You're right, like Blade Runner. It had incredible scope, scale. It had like a sense of geography and like groundedness. It was vast, right, and beautiful. And this is that too. And again, the cultures and the relationships, like you said, feel so much more realized and believable with the cast and the way the tone and the scenes are directed. Where David Lynch is just saying, you fly around and yell, Harkonnen. It's like, okay.
Right.
I was going to say, even just casting people of color as the Fremen, to make them actually appear as natives of the planet.
Instead of just a bunch of white guys. Yeah.
Yes, the distinctions with the Harkonnens of, we can make them look like aliens. They do not have to look like gross red-headed people.
Yeah, why are they all gingers? Yeah. What is that? Anyway,
they're gingers, and then they have
the
most weird
anti-Irish movie ever after Halloween 3.
And their foot soldiers in the Lynch version have like an opposite mohawk where they just have it shaved down the middle, but then they have red hair on the side.
That's the hawk mo. Yeah.
Yeah, super weird. In the Villeneuve, they're like, we're just going to make them all bald and weird looking.
Yeah.
But, Baron Harkonnen, way more menacing in this version, not just weird and like weird warts on his face.
No, he's menacing. I don't know what that pool is that he's going in, just weird stuff.
Yeah, I will just say real quick, just because we're doing plot stuff, there might be some Hobbit-esque elements where I just can't get over certain moments where, like, the big plot point is, like, a poisonous tooth you're going to use to breathe at a guy. I'm like, I don't know.
But the way that's handled is so much better in the Villeneuve version, like, to at least make it somewhat believable, more than the Lynch one did, I think.
And that brings me to another big improvement in the Villeneuve. And I think this is actually an improvement over the book because so the whole plot against the Atreides in the books, literally the second chapter is the Baron Harkonnen like explaining his whole plan to Feyd-Rautha, and then the Lynch version does it too. Like the first scene is the Emperor explaining his plan. And it's like the Villeneuve version, it sets it up almost as a mystery where it's like they kind of know they're going to be betrayed at some point, but we don't know it's Dr. Yui who's the traitor. We don't know the whole plan. over time we learn more and more, and it's more of a surprise when like they don't just say up, oh, it's Dr. Yui, it's like our man on the inside. So that whole setup I thought
You
was
don't
done
hear
way
his
better.
thoughts that he's worried
Yeah.
about doing
Yeah.
it.
Oh, my wife. Yeah.
Right.
But
Like,
so
we
I think
could
that's all
just-
done much better.
Yeah, like it's a show don't tell. Like instead of having someone say I'm conflicted about this, maybe act
Yeah.
conflicted in your
Yeah.
facial
Interesting.
expression.
And overall, I just think all the actors just act more like real people in the Villeneuve version. They're not just kind of saying their lines in a weird, like Shakespearean way or something like that. Like it feels like a real world, like a real lived-in world, and I like that a lot about that version.
And I think
They
that
look age appropriate.
yeah, because isn't he like 15 in the book, Paul Atreides?
Yeah, he's 15 in the books. Timothy Chalamet definitely looks younger than Kyle MacLachlan at that point, even though they were probably both in their mid-20s. But yeah, I think
He's immortal.
Timothy Chalamet was a great choice for Paul Atreides. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's good. And I think just the visual and the score, is insane. And it's just, I guess, treating the book that has gotten so much acclaim, at least with an amount of respect,
yeah,
to nail those details, that part of the density. I can see people saying it's kind of long, it's kind of boring, it's a lot of explaining. I liked it personally. I would stay in there for another 6 hours. Like when the credits rolled, I was like, I just want
Yeah.
more of this. Like I fell in love with it. That was the first Dune thing I experienced. And I
think
guess
that's
it
great.
presents all of those elements in the most favorable light that you possibly could. Like when you compare the scene with that little hunter drone
yeah, the Hunter Seeker.
versus the Lynch version, it's like that scene sucks ass and has no tension. But in
Yeah.
Villeneuve, that's a scary moment,
Totally.
So-
Yeah, I think that just means that there's a success that, someone like you who had never really seen anything Dune related going into it and you kind of fell in love with it by watching that movie, I'd say that was a success.
And it's more like the world of Dune, not even just the film. Just I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by the location, the cultures. I don't even maybe necessarily remember every scene or every plot point, but I remember the world. And
Right.
that I think is a huge success, at least that their team has done in this new version.
And I think Villeneuve has really planned it out well where certain characters we didn't even see, like Feyd-Rautha, like the Emperor, we don't see him in part 1, but he will be in part 2. Princess Irulan, who's his daughter, like all that stuff is coming. And I think there's a lot still left to tell, and I'm really excited for the second part.
Yeah, I really didn't appreciate how David Lynch just shows his hand, like you said, right at the beginning. I'm the
Yeah.
Emperor. I'm going to fuck over the Atreides. Harkonnens,
Right.
you're in on it. Okay, movie. Like, that sucks. But Villeneuve's approach, and even Zendaya is a little bit more present than her, counterpart with Sean Young.
Yeah. And that was kind of people's big
Yeah.
complaint with Zendaya in this movie. It's like, oh, she's barely in it. She's mostly in like dreams and stuff. But that's all foreshadowing for part 2, in which she'll become a main kind of a
Yeah.
bigger character.
And none of that
Well,
happens in the
guess-
Lynch version. She just shows up
Well,
when he
guess
meets the
how many
Fremen.
other fucking things Zendaya had to work on this year? Fucking
Yeah.
Space Jam, Euphoria, Spider-Man. Fucking relax.
Yeah.
She is everywhere. I believe she was the highest grossing star of 2021.
She's in a million
I
things.
called it,
Yeah.
the year of Zendaya. But it's like, if you thought that was small, like, it was actually beefed up from the David Lynch version. You know what I mean? Same thing with Lady
Right.
Jessica. Like, that stuff is good. Like, I like seeing more of that.
Totally.
developed. Yeah. So-
Yeah, it just feels like a lived-in world. I love like the cinematography is amazing. Like you said, the score is great. And even, Villeneuve does add those little details in that I love, like when they arrive on Arrakis, there's the bagpipe player. That's fucking awesome.
Mhm.
Like the Sardaukar troops, there's the throat singer guy. Like that's like some Warhammer 40K shit. Like I love that.
I just like, here, we got some fucking trees. And they're very
Yeah.
expensive to keep alive. Like, just interesting
I love
shit.
that scene too. Yeah, and that's like a not even a book scene. That's just something Villeneuve added as well.
That's awesome.
It
I would
fits the
say
theme, yeah.
beyond content, even just mirroring with the deserty stuff, Mike, it reminds me of your beloved Fury Road, just because we're in the hands of a master director who is thinking about tiny details in every part of his film.
Yeah. And you can feel it. And like Lord of the Rings, I think you could feel the passion for the subject matter from the director, from the cinematographer, from the cast, from Hans Zimmer. I mean, like, everyone really wanted this to not suck. And they to me, I think did it. It's just
think
a
they
weird
nailed
movie.
it.
You might be bored, but
To
they
me,
created
it's
something beautiful.
Yeah, it's really the perfect Dune adaptation. It's like everything I could ask for, even like minor details that I don't love. I can't complain about it too much because it's just like, for instance, they say Harkonnen in the Villeneuve version. I've always pronounced it Harkonnen, but that's a really small detail. I don't really care,
Yeah.
The way, even like the ornithopter design, like I love it. Like everything, it looks so cool. Like they just nailed it.
And it looks
And
like
the worm.
just a weird. It's just bad in David Lynch's version. We've had Star
Yeah.
Wars ships that like they're good looking spaceships. I don't know what they were doing with his, but yeah, the orthopters or whatever in Denis Villeneuve,
Yeah.
they're awesome. That technology feels believable. Everything
Yeah,
feels
the shields.
yeah,
And like
way
I
more
said with
tangible.
Mentats, there's no computers because of the whole AI rebellion years ago. So they have Mentats, and the way they their eyes go white or whatever, and they do their calculations. Like it's just everything is like so good. So I can't even complain about anything.
It's just crazy that Arrakis is Earth and the AI uprising was Terminator. Yeah. And now we're.
It's even making me think of Star Trek, Mike. All these things that are like, no, the AI wars of the 10 years ago.
Yeah,
I'm
like the
no,
eugenics
those are the
wars
years
of
where I'm going to
1993.
grow up. Yeah, it's bullshit, Mike.
There was no
By the way,
eugenics war.
clones also become a big thing in the Dune universe as well in later books.
Because because again, we're pretty much discussing the first book, and there's a ton of sequels, I guess, that document
there's
the continued adventures of whoever survives to the end of this book.
That's right. So the sequel to Dune, written by Frank Herbert, was Dune Messiah, and then there was Children of Dune, Dune Chapter House, and like I think he wrote 5 or 6 Dune books before he died, and then, like I said, his son wrote a bunch of prequels and stuff. But I do think if part 2 is successful enough, they could make a third movie about Dune Messiah, and that's a really interesting kind of turning the hero's journey, chosen one, on its head, because it kind of basically Paul Atreides does like a heel turn as the leader of the Fremen and becomes like basically a charismatic cult leader. And then
70s.
his son is Leto 2 kind of becomes the main character, and
nice.
So it gets really interesting. Duncan Idaho, there's like he becomes a clone. There's like hundreds of Duncan Idaho clones.
Just a man making his way in the galaxy. Yeah.
So that could be a thing with Jason Momoa. I don't know, but
his dad is Boba Fett.
So I guess so. The point is, though, if this is successful, they have. I always thought Dune was just one book. So now there could be potential future sequels with the same cast. Like they could have a Duneverse, let's say, on their hands at WB.
And actually,
there's plenty of content to feed that.
Yeah, and one thing has been officially announced: they're making a show about the Bene Gesserit sisterhood that's like a prequel to Dune.
It's called The Voice. It's on ABC.
No, but really, they're making that show.
Your voice on me,
and,
Mike.
No.
Villeneuve is going to direct the pilot, I
You're
guess.
going to Hollywood. Sorry.
So I don't know what that's going to be like, but they're
Bene
already
Gesserit.
making spin-offs. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Wow.
So it's kind of crazy. We'll see how it goes. But by the way, I didn't mention there was also a 2000 sci-fi miniseries of Dune, and then they made a sequel to that called Children of Dune, which is Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, the second and third books combined.
Oh,
I almost want to even say I was going to call it Children of Dune, Jacob. I almost wonder if that's the one that I saw. Now, when I was a kid, we taped this, I'm pretty sure. It was just one of those things where I don't know if it was because of the marketing or what. I remember having conversations with my dad or even my brother just going, "Did you see the commercials for that Dune TV show? The budget on it looks huge."
Oh, wow.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to watch that one yet. I kind of want to as just a Dune completionist.
Oh, he has a place.
I believe he plays Leto too.
Yeah, in Children of Dune. Yeah, so I forget the actor that plays Paul but basically Children of Dune 2003 is the sequel where Leto becomes the main kind of protagonist. Basically, spoiler alert for that book, Paul Atreides dies at one point.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, but he kind of becomes like an evil cult leader and then dies. And then Leto, too, has to become like the new hero. Could be interesting.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
I think they've done a good job of setting all of that up, potentially, right?
Yes, absolutely. And Mike, why would Warner Brothers be afraid to put the money down now to build out your entire corner of your sci-fi? when you see
Damn.
the
Yeah.
strength of the Star Wars brand episodically on Disney Plus, wouldn't you be some dumb executive who's like, we've got one of those stupid streaming things, buy up a sci-fi thing, you morons?
And the other thing too is
Yeah.
you could build a ton of these sets that will be shared amongst all the series already. Like you could plan for that, you know, if there's throne rooms, blah, blah, blah. That's a little nitty gritty. But, you know,
think about, what Warner Brothers has right now. They've got DC EU, constant, mistakes there. They've got the Fantastic Beasts. Nobody likes those.
nope.
They don't have a lot going for them right now. They should
Jacob,
invest.
they're trying to convince us we want more Game of Thrones, which is going to be their next biggest battle. So,
Right.
yeah, you do got to wonder.
Yeah, they're trying.
Yeah.
This could have potentially feels like we said Game of Thrones in space. You know, these factions warring over
Very much.
whatever. The throne is the
Yeah.
planet, and then
And by the way,
yeah,
Game of Thrones, I was thinking about, Duke Leto. He's kind of a proto Ned Stark character where he's like the super great guy, very honorable, but ends up
Dooskied.
being very naive about the real world and politics and gets dooskied because
as soon as he's pulled into the real game. Yeah.
yeah. So
Interesting.
very similar there. I don't know if George R. R. Martin was inspired at all by Dune, but a lot of similarities.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a ripple effect. But I guess, future looks bright, obviously, because of how well this is done. Everyone's praising it. And then, let's say HBO, I guess, for lack of a better term, has a big sandbox in which to play for the next coming years. So
Yeah.
we'll see what turns up
so.
of it. But for now, I think it's time to go to our final thoughts on the desert planet Arrakis. Dune, right after this.
Having a vision. And that's that we're wrapping things up here on Dune. Giving our final thoughts on the entire franchise, on the movies we enjoyed, that sci-fi miniseries that I am absolutely going to look up after this just to get a kick out of that.
Of course.
Track down that Dune 4K release Jacob was saying. And there's a
Definitely.
lot to watch.
Yeah, I need to see that milking cat in 4K.
Nope.
Insane.
I can't. We haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg on the weird shit in David Lynch's movies.
Yes.
So yeah, just for curiosity's sake, trust me, you have not heard the weirdest of it. So
No.
no podcast can contain all of that. Anyway,
You haven't seen a young girl with the voice of a clearly overdubbed adult woman
murder a
talking
man
in a baby voice. Yes.
and dance with a knife. I think she dabs with it. It's very weird.
That's
Yes.
On the battlefield, yep. But Dune, we've done it. We've made it to Arrakis. We got screwed over by the Emperor of all space. And now we're hiding in the desert, but at least we can still talk to you guys about Dune. Yeah.
That's right. I was, super happy to talk. You got to cut me off because I'll just talk about Dune for another 5 hours if you're not careful. So super happy to talk about it.
What do you like about it so much?
I just love the world, the world building, the characters, and sort of the themes. There's a lot of subtle themes you can read into it. Obviously, it's kind of a take on the hero's journey. But like I said, with Dune Messiah, it kind of flips that in an interesting way. And, like I said, a lot of the theology I find very interesting in that kind of thing. So I just love the world mainly.
Yeah, I guess, I mentioned it earlier. The similarity between Lord of the Rings and this is generally it creates a world that people love. Similar to Harry Potter, too. Like, people love the world of Harry Potter almost more than any individual piece of media set in it. Same thing with Middle-earth.
Very true.
And this has that. Like, I like the planet Arrakis already after one movie more than any single planet on Star Wars. Like, I'm so fascinated by it because it feels like you're doing some kind of future archaeology, just exploring its concepts and its peoples and its traditions. And I really like that. And that's what Denis Villeneuve had done. And there's been a couple times where media that I'd never intersected with, like He-Man, is done well now and then inspires me to take a look back. And Karate Kid has done this for a lot of people.
True.
And this has done that.
So perfect.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at. I mean, I love Dune. I love the world of it. And Denis Villeneuve's version is my favorite flavor that's been baked yet. But I was also down to then look at David Lynch and like, how did he interpret this? Because the world of Dune is fucking awesome, honestly. And thank you for Star Wars, Frank Herbert. You know, thanks for everything else that I like. Blade Runner and Sean Young. Thank you, Frank Herbert.
Hey, you mentioned Star Wars. It's like Tatooine. There probably would be no Tatooine if there wasn't.
Or Jakku.
Yeah.
Oh, can you imagine if we had no Jakku?
No Kessel Run because of the spice. Come on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we owe it all to him, Frank Herbert, for a lot of the shit that we like. You know, it's because just like Tolkien, it was written with such attention to detail and care, and that's why it feels like something you could believe that happened almost. It's almost like an alternate future history, the way Middle Earth feels like almost a past history.
Totally.
It's that detailed.
And the way it's written, the book, every chapter there's like a quote from Princess Irulan, who became a historian writing about these times. So it feels, just like Lord of the Rings with all its appendices and songs and all that add context to the story. Like that's what Dune is, and it feels just as dense as something like Lord of the Rings, and that's why I really love it, is the world building. So not to harp on that too much, but yeah,
one of the biggest strengths. And I love Tremors too, so thank you, Dune. Like unironically.
Thank you, Dune.
Who knew? Yeah. But thanks for no, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say I'll let Jacob go last since he's loving this thing. Yeah, I agree, Mike. Thank you for the Dune info. It's been a blast. I watched this. This came out at Thanksgiving, I believe, at home.
Yep.
With my brother and my dad. My brother had just finished reading the book.
Nice.
And I just remember him going, God, I mean, the lines are right out of the book. He is just quoting this thing directly. It really does feel like a very loving adaptation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's so interesting to kind of compare the Lynch version. You see the same scenes done very similarly, but at the same time differently.
Worsely.
Even
mostly.
Dr. Kynes explaining the still suit, and they see that
how he ties his
Paul
shoe.
has done it right. He's like, oh, have you ever worn this before?
What?
He shall know our ways.
How are you doing this?
Like that was
it's just wild. And even I'd say it's worth, normies, go on, just Google character to character, see the casting. It's wild. Read up who Everett McGill was, and then look at Javier Bardem and go, oh yeah, I can see how that would be the same character. It's just a treat. But the David Lynch version is made by a guy who is relating to the weirdness. He likes that it's a sci-fi book. He likes that it's weird.
Mm-hmm.
Denis Villeneuve, you hear him speak very poetically about things in a very French manner. And he was asked point blank, what do you think about the white savior trope in this book? This is just another one of these stories about a fucking white guy coming into the place, and he's the holy one, the chosen one who
fix
saves
the locals' problems. Yeah, okay.
Iron Fist, all these works of media that were ripped apart for this.
Yep.
And his answer, which I think was amazing, was, I don't see it that way at all. I see it in a romantic way. I see it as the romanticism of a culture. That it's literally like T.S. Lawrence in Lawrence of Arabia, who is coming to a crisis and helping the people in a way where it's not all about him. It's actually all about the country or the planet in this instance. And I think that's a fair take.
I mean, he does get basically fucking run out of his house, left for dead, and then adopted, much like Boba Fett, adopted into this culture, and he has a reverence for it. Eventually he gains...
He has powers, Mike. Yes, he does have...
But it feels like his heart's in the right place.
Hero's journey. That's exactly what it is. He is... There is nothing where he goes like, God, these fucking idiot Fremen, if only they realized that if you do this instead, we could all get around the worms. No, it's actually about him sort of excelling at wanting to be part of their world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As opposed to the Last Samurai version where it's like, he will also marry the wife of the man he murdered and supplant him.
It's like, man, fuck you, samurais. Ever heard of guns? This is bullshit.
That's
what's interesting too in the book. So obviously his concubine is Shani, but in the end he marries Princess Irulan for political reasons.
Which is in the David Lynch version.
Yeah, but Lady Jessica, who was never Duke Leto's wife, she was his concubine, explains and this is the last line of the book that they shall see us as wives because they're their true lovers. So I mean, again,
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
I just
History
think,
will
you know,
see
this
us
book
as
was
wives.
written
Yeah.
in 1965, a very different era than today. And in many ways, I think it was really ahead of its time.
I do appreciate that speech from
Yeah.
David Lynch. Two things that I forgot that you just jogged my mind is when he goes over to Chani and he's like, she will never know no touch nor look of warmth, not a single, like, don't worry,
That's
girl,
from the
this is my
book,
promise to you. I love that. And then
Totally
when he's
political.
crying and the Fremen say he gives his water to the dead and they're like, he's so generous. I'm like, wow.
Yes.
That's the fucking.
Well, I love when the guy
dumbest-
spits on the ground. No, I love when the guy spits on the ground in Delavan's version.
It
And they're like,
beats him
no,
over.
it's
Oh,
not.
it's
It's,
hold on.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's straight from the books.
Yeah, I love that.
You know, the Fremen see water as the most
Oh.
precious commodity. So spitting on the ground, offering your gift of water, that's like the most honorable thing you can do.
Love it.
And yeah, it mirrors, you know, Duke Leto said, you know, explains like he couldn't marry Lady Jessica because he needs to stay a bachelor for political reasons so that other houses think they have a chance to marry into House Atreides.
Mhm.
So it's all for political reasons, but he was in love with Lady Jessica, obviously. So Paul kind of takes those lessons from his parents in an interesting way.
Well, like you said, he
Interesting.
couldn't play the game though. It's so interesting that Paul is able to elevate it.
Yeah.
And
So he kind of
must.
takes his knowledge from House Atreides, mixes it with Fremen culture, and becomes Muad'Dib, the Kwisatz Haderach.
Yeah. And because his mother
Chosen
was
one.
Bene Gesserit.
Bene Gesserit, who have been, you know, mixing the bloodlines for years and years, trying to basically birth the chosen one, which again, a lot of similarities with Star Wars. You know, basically the Bene Gesserit are just an all-female Jedi,
Trying to
and
make an Anakin.
there's a chosen one, Anakin. Yeah, so
Wow.
Never been a
interesting,
boy
but-
before. Don't have a boy, Jessica.
Don't
but
you
she
do
it.
willed it. You read that and you're like, what the fuck
What?
is this? I just gotta say, there's so much to laugh about. There's so much I am impressed by. Just hearing you guys bring up scenes, I do get excited. I am like, God, that fucking ruled. The second part's gonna rule. The only reason I don't like this movie is because it's one half of a story I want the rest of. People did not know. When the credits came up, the opening title card, and it says Dune, fade out. Part one. Fade
Right.
out. People didn't know that. You know, the audience went in not knowing that. Obviously, if we're a little more savvy, we did. But even I was kind of blown away by that, and want the whole story. I'm
Well,
excited.
again, it's the
Yeah,
only
ending,
way.
Yeah.
It's
wasn't a
exactly.
satisfying
It's the only way it
endpoint,
could have
but
been
yeah.
made as a movie because, again, you couldn't tell this whole story in one movie. That's what David Lynch tried to do, and it didn't work. This movie was 2.5 hours, 2:45 minutes long, and it was still only the first half. So, of course,
Yes.
you know, it's like, you know, if you go into Fellowship of the Ring, you're not disappointed because you don't know what's going to happen. Are they going to get the ring to Mordor yet, right? But once part two comes out and you can watch them back to back, I think it'll make the first one better. You know,
Yeah. I think it'll be
as
additive
well.
as long as they stick the landing. And
but definitely the second
should.
half of the story is way weirder and out there with some again, Saint Aaliyah of the Knife, Paul's sister. Very interested to see how they do that. So there's some definitely out there concepts in the second half of the book, but I think, you know, if anyone can do it, I think Villeneuve can, because just when they announced that he was making Dune, I was so excited because I've loved like every movie I've seen from him. He hasn't made a bad movie, so I was just like, his track record's great. So I totally trust him to make a great second half. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe get Ryan Gosling in there too to play Sting's character. He can sing.
Maybe,
I'll
yeah.
give it.
Gotta get Ryan Gosling, of course.
Yeah.
Or
everyone who was in Blade
his
Runner.
other, I was gonna say his other beloved co-worker from his film Arrival, Jeremy Renner, would be a great guy.
Jeremy Renner would be a good Harkonnen, actually. Yeah, good job, Hawkeye.
Yeah.
Hawkonnen. There we go. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to part two. I think they should knock it out of the park again. They've done a great job setting it up. It's almost like the first film is just like priming you for even more weirdness. Like at least now you have a palette for what's to come. And they needed to do that groundwork.
I think it is like, you know, it's not a complete story, so I definitely understand that criticism, but it leaves you wanting to know what's going to happen next. To me, it kind of left off at the right point where it's like he's just meeting the Fremen. He has the knife fight with Jamis, and then, you know, they go from there.
With the Fremen. We'll see what happens next. Yeah.
And I like that they were able to set up so much and spend so much time setting up everything that happens, right?
Well, as we've done on this podcast, we're going to say Dune Normies Like Us Part 1.
Oh.
Gasp. Jacob's done all this great setup. We know Dune. And when we come back to talk the wrap-up of this film in 2 years, Normies, get ready.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can't wait.
Yeah, at this point, I'm essentially just reviewing the world of Dune, and I love it. And we'll see what the HBO version is coming up. But for now, I guess, thanks for listening and coming along on our desert journey with non-rhythmic stepping.
Yeah, and Normies, if you want to be a Dune completionist, I would say watch the Spice Diver Redux Lynch version, which we can probably throw a link in the description. Check out the Sci-Fi mini-series. Check out Jodorowsky's Dune documentary, read the books, and then you'll be a complete Dune head. And of course, watch the
all
David
that,
Lynch.
but unfortunately, we do have to use the voice on you for a second and say, rate and review this podcast.
Yes.
5 stars. 5 stars. That helps us out. Leave a comment. Hit us up at normies_like_us. Check us out on the YouTube too. Jacob does awesome videos there where you can watch these if you don't just want to listen along. It's
right.
like you're hanging out with us. And again, write to us about cool things we're going to do on next episodes. We might just go in and keep talking sandy people and do Boba Fett next week. We don't know. Write to us and tell us if you want that. So.
Yeah, exactly. Let us know what you've been
We're
watching.
the opposite of Anakin. We love sand.
Wow.
And on that note...
It's rough and it's coarse and it's great.
Love it.
Great to exfoliate.
Thanks, Normies. Really had fun talking about Dune. Loved it. Dune heads. We out
With
here.
your hosts, this is Colin Harkonnen.
And Mike Melange.
This is Jacob Atreides, but you may call me Kuab Deeb.
Just don't call him late for dinner.
That's right. Bye, Normies.
I'm deep to you, Normies.
Bye.
Bye.
I spit on the ground.